Good evening, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring classicist here, a wandering author, ready to remind you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today we're on chapter 9 of book 5 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and he's going to talk about something that's pretty interesting. I think this statement right here really sums up what the main message of this chapter is. Is it really possible to suffer injustice voluntarily? Can you be a victim by choice? Aristotle asks. Um, that's a surprisingly deep question. Uh, so let's see. What does he have to say about it? Well, it turns out quite a bit. So let's get started. He opens up the chapter and says, "But it may perhaps be doubted whether our discussion of suffering and doing injustice has been sufficiently definite. And, in the first place, whether the matter really is as Euripides has put it in the strange lines, 'I killed my mother, that's the tale in brief!' Exclamation point." So what he's saying, that was a reference to a play by Euripides where a character kills his mother against his own will. And follow up, were you both willing or unwilling? And that's like an extreme example, but what Aristotle's really getting at is when it comes to injustice, there's both a perpetrator, somebody who does the thing, and then the victim, the person who suffers the injustice. And you can commit an injustice not voluntarily or involuntarily, but he ends up concluding that you cannot suffer an injustice voluntarily, because the second that you do, it transforms the action. Is it really possible to suffer injustice voluntarily? Or on the contrary, is suffering injustice always involuntary, just as acting unjustly is always voluntarily? So to act unjustly, you've got to do it voluntarily. So is it really possible to suffer injustice voluntarily? But it would seem paradoxical to assert that even being treated justly is always voluntary, for people are sometimes treated justly against their will. So you can be treated real good, but be like against it the whole time. Doing what is unjust is not identical with acting unjustly. So you can do unjust things and not be acting unjustly. Nor yet is suffering what is unjust identical with being treated unjustly. But if to act unjustly is simply to do harm voluntarily, and voluntarily means knowing the person affected, the instrument, and the manner of injury, it will follow both that the man of defective self-restraint, inasmuch as he voluntarily harms himself, voluntarily suffers injustice, and also that it is possible for a man to act unjustly towards himself. So if you don't have self-control, you could do injustice to yourself and do it voluntarily. So that's one loophole Aristotle says exists. Moreover, lack of self-restraint may make a person voluntarily submit to being harmed by another, which would again prove that it is possible to suffer injustice voluntarily. So somebody might not have any self-control and they might let somebody else treat them badly because of that. So it's possible to suffer injustice voluntarily. No one can suffer injustice voluntarily because no one can wish to be harmed. Yeah, no one can suffer injustice voluntarily because no one can wish to be harmed. One who gives away what is his own, as Homer says that Glaucus gave to Diomede, cannot be said to suffer injustice. And I bet that second name was probably Diomede, or I could still be pronouncing it wrong. Who knows? I'm sure some kind of Greek specialist, I'm totally an amateur here, knows, but yeah. So it is clear then that it is not possible to suffer injustice voluntarily. Is it ever he who gives the unduly large share, or is it always he who receives it that is guilty of the injustice? If you give away too much stuff, did you just commit an injustice? Too much of your own stuff. Can one act unjustly towards oneself? If the former alternative is possible, if you can act unjustly to yourself, that is, if it may be the giver and not the receiver of too large a share who acts unjustly, then when a man knowingly and voluntarily assigns a larger share to another than to himself, as modest people are thought to do, For an equitable man is apt to take less than his due. This is a case of acting unjustly towards oneself. So modest people, according to Aristotle, are thought to give away more, or give away a larger share of stuff and accept less than what is their due, what they truly deserve. And that is a case of acting unjustly towards yourself. So don't give away all of your value. That's what Aristotle has to say. But perhaps this also requires qualifications for the man who gave himself the smaller share. May possibly have got a larger share of some other good thing, for instance, glory or intrinsic moral nobility. So if you do give away all of your value, if you give away all of something, or if you give away too much of something, you may be rewarded in a roundabout way, and that may kind of even the tables. You might get glory or moral nobility out of it. Also, the inference may be refuted by referring to our definition of acting unjustly. And it is clear that the giver and the receiver of an undue share may be acting unjustly. Again, to do a thing has more than one meaning. In a certain sense, a murder is done by the inanimate instrument, or by the murderer's hand, or by a slave's acting under orders. So that's really getting into like the legal sense of justice, but he's saying like the actual murder object is what committed the murder in a certain sense. Again, although if a judge has given an unfair judgment in ignorance, he is not guilty of injustice, nor is the judgment unjust in the legal sense of justice. So then he switches pages, and now we're talking about what happens in the courtroom. If a judge gives an unfair sentence, then he is not guilty of injustice in the legal sense. He may have done everything according to the letter of the law, even though it wasn't the right call. Yet if he knowingly gives an unjust judgment, he is himself taking more than his share, either of favor or of vengeance. So if he's on purpose and knows that he's giving an unfair judgment, the judge that is, then he's doing it out of vengeance or favor. Men think that it is in their power to act unjustly, and therefore that it is easy to be just. But really this is not so. It is easy to lie with one's neighbor's wife, or strike a bystander, or slip some money into a man's hand, and is not in one's power. Similarly, men suppose it requires no special wisdom to know what is just and what is unjust, because it is not difficult to understand the pronouncements of the law. So just because you understand what the law says doesn't necessarily mean that you know what just and unjust things are, according to Aristotle. And he goes on to say, but the actions prescribed by law are only accidentally just actions. How an action must be performed, how a distribution must be made to be a just action or a just distribution, to know this is a harder task than to know what medical treatment will produce health. So for Aristotle, for something to be just, it has a lot to do with, like we said yesterday, the intention, how something is done. And to really know how to do that is not as easy as following the letters of the law. It's as difficult as being a doctor, according to Aristotle. And then he goes on to go with a great analogy, which I have here. I know that might be hard for you guys to see, but I'll read it for you. Even in medicine, though it is easy to know what honey, wine, and hellebore, cautery, and surgery are, to know how and to whom and when to apply them so as to effect a cure is no less an undertaking than to be a physician. So you might know that certain medicines are good or can heal people, but then to actually know how to use the tools of medicine to heal somebody, that is no less of an undertaking than to be a physician. You got to be a doctor. And for this very reason, men think that the just man will get unjustly no less than justly, because the just man is not less, but rather more able than another to do any particular unjust things. For example, he can lie with a woman or strike a blow, and a brave man can throw away his shield and wheel to the right and run away. But to be a coward and to be guilty of injustice consists not in doing these things, but in doing them from a certain disposition of mind. Just as to be a physician and cure one's patients is not a matter of employing or not employing surgery or drugs, but of doing so in a certain manner. So just because you've got a scalpel and a stethoscope does not make you a doctor or a surgeon. It's knowing how to use them. And it's the same thing with just and unjust actions. It's not so much that you could read the letters of the law, it's doing it from a certain disposition of mind or in your heart. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good summary. Aristotle's really thorough on this one. We've got 2 more chapters in Book 5, and by the end of Book 5, we'll know everything there is to know about justice, I imagine. So let's buckle up and see what's going to happen. This is a wandering author here. Thanks for listening. As always, what are you guys doing to inspire, uplift, and empower your local community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part. You can count on me to do mine daily. Until next time, love y'all.